So we have a packed agenda for today. I'll introduce the speakers and the sessions progressively. And coming next, Dimitri Schurman will present elements to ensure the sustainability of Living Labs. Dimitri is a recognized contributor to the Living Lab community, having advanced significant research in these regards. He is innovation expert, methodology and monitoring at IMEC, a matured and well-established Living Lab based in Belgium, and an old member. So without further delay, I'll pass the word to Dimitri. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for the introduction. I'll try to get my slides up. Yes, this works. So today I will be talking about sustainability in Living Labs, and I will give you a couple of frameworks that you can use if you think how to sustain your Living Lab, or if you're thinking about building up a Living Lab, of course, or how to sustain it over a longer period of time, because a Living Lab has the most value if you do not do it for one project, but if you do it for multiple projects over multiple years. And I will give you some handles on how to approach this and give examples from concrete Living Labs, from a more agroecology background, but also from a more general background where I normally come from. So I have been working on Flemish ICT Living Labs since 2005. I have worked as a Living Lab as a service program at IMEC. So this is one of the models that you can consider to offer services within your Living Labs and to attract a lot of youth. A bit more about that later on in the presentation. I did a lot of innovation projects, and I also work now officially for Enel part of my time, and I also work at the International Society of Professional Innovation Management. So I try to balance a little bit between research and between practice. And I also did a PhD in open and user innovation and Living Labs almost 10 years ago, but I think the results are still quite relevant. So I will refer to the model later on in my presentation. Some very small words about IMEC if you don't know them. So we are a world-leading R&D hub. We work mostly on chips, sensor technology, so quite deep technology. And there we want to shape the future. So from this very deep technical research, we want to find the right use cases to get these research up to higher TRL levels and to improve the quality of life. That's the ultimate goal. So the major thing within IMEC is that we have a unique infrastructure, more than 12,000 square meters of clean room capacity. So they're mostly based in Leuven. A lot of people, we also work internationally, not only in Flanders, but also worldwide. We have offices and we collaborate with all kinds of large and small technology players. And we work together with company startups and academia. So these are the research groups that also collaborate with IMEC in Belgium. But we also have R&D centers and offices in the 3 continents. And this is our main slide where we show that IMEC is a bridge between universities, government, and industry. But something is missing in this picture, but more about that later on in the presentation, which also shows with IMEC we are forming and doing Living Lab activities, but this is not that easy to do that. We have to keep on battling to also involve users and to also work according to these principles. But now about the topic of the presentation. So for introduction, this is a slide showing the research attention on Living Labs from the right 2005 to 2023. We see that the attention in Living Labs in terms of papers published is really rising and is increasing year over year. So there's really a boom of scholars publishing about Living Labs. But if we do an analysis of the accredited Living Labs of Enel, these are numbers, I think, of last year, the majority of Living Labs that have awarded the label over time are currently inactive, and there's 152 living labs which are currently active. So there seems to be an issue with sustainability, and this is exactly what I want to talk about today. So how can you make sure that if you establish a living lab, that you can sustain your activities over time? And this is also a big topic within the living labs community, and I want to share with you some of my experiences and give very concrete examples of success cases, but also of cases that have failed. I've built up my presentation in 3 parts. So the first part is a bit more general about characteristics and about the types of living labs to show a little bit, to give you a little bit more of context. So it was already said in the introduction, but living labs are an approach to innovation characterized by multi-actors. So multiple actors are active in a living lab. Real-life experimentation is really key. Multi-method, so you don't experiment using only one method. You need multiple methods to really be able to assess the impact of your interventions. It's about active user involvement. Co-creation is really the key word here, the key way of interacting. And ecosystem orchestration is also very important, as living labs tend to focus on on innovation ecosystems. Take a more broader perspective, then you also need to orchestrate this ecosystem. This is very important. And in fact, the concept is influenced and shaped by over 50 years of policy and research practice, and it can be seen as the next step from triple helix towards quadruple helix. So instead of the government, business, and academia, now it's extended to also include the civil society or the society as a whole. Sometimes also we talk about quintuple helix innovation, where you see the broader ecosystem as a 5th helix, but I think quadruple helix, most of it is already in there. And here you see with our corporate slide, society is indeed missing. So this shows that even in an organization as IMEC, where we have been doing living labs for quite some years, it's still a fight and a battle to get the societal topic high on the agenda. So in terms of types of living labs, I got this figure from my dear colleague Chris McPhee, who has published in this regards, and he made this very nice paper on the defining characteristics of agro-ecosystem living labs, for which I think soil health living labs are most linked. And he mainly makes a distinction between living labs which are place-based, which really focus on a certain place, and all their operations, etc., are based and surrounded around this place, and non-place living labs. And within the place living labs, we have typically the urban living labs, where you have a city. A lot of cities have their own living labs, even have multiple living labs. Think about Barcelona. I think they have about 10 different living labs with different topics, but mostly focused about the city and about the needs of citizens and stuff that is happening in the city. Rural living labs are then living labs linked to an area which is not a city environment, but also linked to that specific area. And then we have agro-ecosystem living labs, which also have a very strong link with the agro-ecosystem in which they are established. And I add another type of living lab, which is also gaining a lot of popularity the past few years, which are campus living labs, which are situated at the campus at the university. And there also the location of the university is the start to also deploy living lab activities and also connect the research, the university research more to the broader societal topics. So when are living labs especially relevant? For me, it's about these 4 elements, which also link to the characteristics of living labs. First and foremost, if you are dealing with wicked problems, wicked problems, it's a known concept, are problems that are more complex, that cannot be solved by only one solution, but that require thorough investigation and multiple iterations. Like, for example, climate change is a wicked problem. This is a very known example. Also, living labs are very relevant if you are dealing with multiple users, multiple stakeholder groups, and they are involved or affected. Think again, climate change is a very important wicked problem, which also has these characteristics. Also, if you are operating in a complex or an underdeveloped ecosystem and or market, then also a living lab also really makes sense to develop this market or to address and orchestrate this complexity which is in your ecosystem, and to try to involve multiple actors to come to solutions. And of course, also linking to the previous slide, if the factor location is an important role. If this place, it's not place, it was place. Place, I made a small spelling mistake. If factor location plays an important role in your innovation process, then a living lab is also very important, because the real life experimentation then really takes a very important role by advancing your innovation process. So this was what my PhD was about, to position these characteristics and these elements in three linked but separate layers. So first of all, we have the Living Lab organization, which is dealing with multi-actor orchestration. So you set up a Living Lab for normally more than one project. Sometimes you start with a funded project to establish your Living Lab, but the idea should be that your Living Lab sustains beyond the project, and that you have multiple projects running in your Living Lab, and then you generate and accumulate knowledge. So within these projects, there it is about having multiple methods and about active user involvement. And of course, and the third layer within these projects, you have multiple Living Lab user and stakeholder activities. So one project consists of multiple activities, and these activities are engaging users and testing in real life. So their real life and co-creation are the main characteristics. So this makes a bit more of a positioning of these 5 elements that we mentioned at the start of the presentation, but based on these layers. And if you want to set up and sustain a Living Lab, you need to think about these three layers. You need to think about who's in my organization, who will be supporting my Living Lab, contributing over a longer period of time, on top of the single project. And then we have the project. Who are the customers? Who are the main utilizers within my project? And how will I engage with users and with stakeholders within these projects? And basically, by operating like this, and by also having this very strong ecosystem engagement, multi-actor involvement, a Living Lab is in constant flux, because you have your organization in which you set some targets, you have some KPIs, you have some strategy, you make this strategy happen within your project, and you learn in your project by having user and stakeholder activities. So this influences the outcome of your project, and the outcome of the project also has an influence then on your organization, and you learn. So these 3 elements are in a way in constant flux and are influencing each other and adapting each other. This also, for me, makes a Living Lab really a Living Lab. It's really a living entity that is learning by doing projects and by doing these different activities. So how now to set up and sustain a Living Lab? These are, for me, the main questions that you need to answer. So for the organizational layer, you need to think, what is the vision and the mission of our Living Lab? Why are we doing this? And who are the partners and assets? Or do we need specific assets or resources to realize this? Then for the projects, what are then the kind of innovations that we are co-creating or that we are testing within these projects? And what value are we providing, especially also linked to the utilizer within your project, but also to the main stakeholders and the main partners within your Living Lab organization. And then for the activities, who are the main stakeholders that I need to involve in a project, and how will we involve them? How will we perform the testing? So these are, for me, the 3 different elements with the questions that you need to answer before setting up and then over time sustaining your Living Lab. Okay. Part 2, the main actors of in a Living Lab. So this is based on some research on who are the actors that are active and operating within a Living Lab. So the research has been done based on a lot of different Living Lab projects and a lot of Living Lab organizations, and it shows some kind of typology. But I will introduce it to you because it will show how a different choice of the type of Living Lab will affect your sustainability and will affect, in fact, these 3 elements, these 3 layers in your Living Lab. So this is what the research came up with. So it was researched by Leminen, and I also, Leminen only added the utilizers, the neighbors, providers, and the users, but I also added researchers as a 5th category, because I think they're somehow a bit a separate kind of category being active in Living Labs. So the utilizers, who are the utilizers in the Living Lab? They are mainly the customers They utilize the Living Lab and the infrastructure to co-create and test their innovations. So they will be mostly active on the project layer, but sometimes utilizers will also be part of your organizational layer. Enablers, very important. You need resources that are able to sustain your Living Lab over a longer period of time. So who are the main funders of your Living Lab? Providers are the ones who provide you infrastructure or maybe specific services that you will be using in your Living Lab activities. Users, of course, very important, critical in your Living Lab. Who are the participants and the active co-creators of the Living Lab activities? So stakeholders, it can be stakeholders, but also the end users of the innovation. And last but not least, as I said, researchers, they are in fact the knowledge generators of the Living Lab. They are working with research infrastructure, user and stakeholder co-creation, but they are really generating the knowledge inside this Living Lab. And these 5 roles are active or can be distinguished in most Living Labs. But based on which of these roles is the dominant actor in your Living Lab, you will have a different outlook. And I will now give examples of all these different types of Living Labs from reality. So first, the utilizer-driven Living Labs. So there, the main focus is on customers, so that you have a Living Lab in which you attract customers and in which you have recurring incomes by services that you sell to customers or by, for example, membership fees, as this Living Lab. This is the DOL Living Lab, the Danish Outdoor Lighting Lab, which at first was a Living Lab that was focusing on smart lighting, which let's say was more like a lighthouse where a lot of smart lighting technology was being displayed. It's really in a location a bit outside of Copenhagen, where all these kinds of innovative lighting was demonstrated. But over time, this Living Lab also started to change, and more connectivity and smart city related innovations came there to showcase, but also to test their innovations. So from more showcase lighthouse, this evolved into a real smart city Living Lab where you can go and you can test out your innovations in the context of smart city in real life, in the streets, which have been prepared in order to have the showcase and have the testing of your innovation. So for this DOL Living Lab, the city involvement there was very crucial in the success, because a lot of permits were needed to make sure that this was able, that these innovators were able to test and try out their innovation really in real life within the streets of the DOL, around the headquarters of the DOL Living Lab. And also the technical infrastructure there is very important. For innovators, it needed to be easy to come to your Living Lab. So they have a plug and play infrastructure, they have a digital twin, they have a connectivity network. So they are really have a lot of data analytics. So it's plug and play, and it's really focused at servicing these innovators. So the projects are innovator based. The main utilizers are innovators in the context of smart cities. And therefore we got, as I already explained, a shared focus from lighting towards a more broader perspective on smart city and smart mobility. Revenue streams come via membership fees and extra services that are being paid, but also for the city, they find it very interesting as a showcase. It attracts a lot of visitors worldwide to come there. So also Copenhagen gets some kind of a positive, innovative image based on this Living Lab. So there's a win-win for the actors. And in terms of the activities, main activities for the innovators is exposure of their innovation is. So a lot of people come to watch, so they can potentially do business and close business deals, but they get also a lot of feedback by having these their innovations tested in real life, by having all these kind of analytics. So this is the model of a utilizer-driven Living Lab. And I also have an example in Belgium, in Flanders, where we have Ilvo, that also has a Living Lab on agri-food technology. And there they have equipped some lands here in Belgium with all kinds of sensors. We even have some smart drones, which are equipped also with IMEC technology. And they also use this infrastructure so that innovators can come and test out their innovations on these smart lands. And all kinds of innovators come there to test and try out, but also their infrastructure is one of the main key characteristics to attract a lot of innovators and to do testing on these on the topic of agri-food technology. So I think in terms of soil health, a utilizer-driven lab can absolutely also be an option. But then you would need some kind of a shared infrastructure that is interesting for soil health innovators. So what should be there in order to attract these innovators, and what should you offer them? Maybe it would be that you have multiple places that you can compare, for example. This might be a model. And the projects, it would be that you define a service in order to, or multiple services, I would say, that you advance their innovation processes. So it would make sense to see what is still missing for these soil health innovators, what are they still lacking, and you define some services, and therefore you have then these kind of projects. And income revenue could be generated via this project, but also it could be a combination also with the location investing or the region investing, and with the different innovators paying for services. But then you would need, of course, services that they would need. And in terms of activities, it could be technical testing, could also be the feedback and the exposure. It depends a little bit, but I think this can be a very valuable model in the context of soil health living labs. Second are enabler-driven living labs. So enablers are the ones who are funding the living labs. So typically city living labs fall under this category. So this is an example where I was part of also myself, City of People. It has also changed over time. So it started as City of People, where we had a yearly cycle where the City of Ghent, University of Ghent, and IMEC collaborated together to come up with innovations that improve the quality of life of services. But over time now, this has shifted to common. It got a new name, but it also, but the idea remains the same, that we co-create with people in the City of Ghent to improve quality of life and to work on some issues that were in the City of Ghent. So this case, I've already presented it quite some times because it's quite interesting. This case was about loneliness of seniors in buildings in Ghent. There was a collaboration with university students, with the local city stakeholders, with university, and also with IMEC to co-create technology that could be used to solve this loneliness. So here, there's a long-term city commitment, and so the city provides some funding. It's also matched with some funding from university and from IMEC, but there's a long-term commitment. And so it's the enabler that is driving and it is setting a bit the agenda on the topics that are happening in the living lab. So the projects, there's a focus on citizen needs, because this is what the organization, main funder, wants to focus upon. It wants to see a positive transfer of these projects on the quality of life of citizens. And the activities is active co-creation, co-design between all these stakeholder groups that collaborate together in various projects. So an example, I think, that also can be used in this context. Also, it's from my colleague Chris McPhee that I got these slides. It's the Canadian Agroecology Living Lab. So it's a collaboration. It was an initiative in 2018-2023, but there's now a continuation with an even bigger group of living labs, and they're spread all across Canada. And it's basically about exchanging knowledge and exchanging lessons learned and the experience they have during their practices for different topics, for different stuff that they want to achieve based on agroecology. So it's about improving soil and water conservation, reducing water contamination, maximizing habitat capacity, biodiversity, and mitigate and adapt to climate change. So a lot of different topics. Living labs have all their topics, but this, let's say, this network of these living labs is really established in order to allow sharing of lessons learned. So it's 13 living labs spread all over Canada. And here we also see that the place is very important, because it's such a big area. You have such big differences in terms of the climate, in terms of temperature, in terms of the composition of the soil. So it's very interesting and relevant to have an exchange and to have this co-creation based on a network level. So here, this enabler-driven living lab in terms of soil health, it could be driven by a region, by a country, or by a city, or by another location, where research practitioners, farmers, and government are collaborating, and research scientists are collaborating together in order to achieve certain goals relating to soil health. So the project is for achieving these policy goals related to soil health and exchanging of best practices and lessons learned. And activities are their active dissemination and co-creation between these different members in order to improve their ways of working, but also to take these lessons learned back to their own living lab to improve their activities. Okay, then the provider-driven living labs, there the provider is the infrastructure provider. So there the focus is really on this infrastructure and how you can set up an infrastructure that can be used and how to improve the infrastructure. This is really the main reason why the living lab is established. So an example there was in Eindhoven, the city of Statums, which is a city neighborhood, which had a lot of issues in terms of safety, in terms of criminality, also in terms of cleanliness. So there, a lot of sensors were established, a network, very advanced network were established by local technology providers. And there, a lot of tests and experiments were being run in order to work on topics like safety, monitoring, etc. So there, the organization, it was an active collaboration between the city of Eindhoven and between these infrastructure innovators. The projects were attracting service providers or people with interest in these services to using this infrastructure. And the activities were the usage of technology in these projects and also receiving feedback from citizens and city stakeholders in real life. For example, there were set up some projects with the police, which was an important stakeholder there, in order to test the network and to see what kind of services could be built upon this network. So again, a very different model of setting up a living lab, but that also fits with this category and that also sustained for quite a couple of years over time. So in terms of soil health, I haven't really found an example yet, but maybe you know some. So if you know some example relating to soil health that has more or less this model, please, you can forward it to me. But there you would need some kind of specific monitoring or technical infrastructure related to soil health that is still a bit in development, that needs more use cases and more development in order to grow. And there the focus of the project would be on testing the infrastructure and the activities. It will be on impact assessment. What is the impact of the infrastructure on the projects and on the services that you provide over these kind of projects? And then the user-driven living labs. So these are living labs where the user is the main actor. Of course, the user is always an important actor, but mainly then on the layer of the projects or of the co-creation activities that you are performing. But if you really place the user at the center, then the user is the one who is driving the living lab and how you are perceiving the living lab. So this is an example from our City of Things living lab, where we had a specific side track, which was called Hackable City of Things. And in this track, we facilitated local activism, citizen activism groups with technology in order to assess whether the problems that they experienced were a reality or not. So this was an example on speeding in the zone 30, where you could only drive 30 miles an hour, 30 kilometers an hour, sorry. And within this bike that is mounted, this flash thing that is mounted on the bike can record the speed of the cars. And here you see that there was really an issue that 2/3 of the cars were speeding. So so now the citizen activism group got data to back their claims, which they could use as some leverage to talk to the city officials. So here, the organization is about citizen activism. So we actively collaborated with them and we involved them with technology hackers. However, there was also an issue here because the city itself was not very so pleased, because at some point here we got some newspapers taking this over, but giving some bad press over the city. So we really clashed here with this initiative with the city. So this also shows that it's sometimes difficult to balance the needs within your living labs, that you really need to actively manage how you collaborate together, and if all the vision that you have, if this is in sync and if this aligns with each other. So this is very, very important. The projects were very much bottom-up topics, which were driven by the users and especially by these activism groups of citizens. And activities were co-creation and co-design with this group so that we could create technology that could really fit the needs that they had as an activism group. And in fact, this also sustained despite the bad press and despite some arguments we had with the city in which we did this. Because one of the projects of Hackable City of Things, which is very low cost, but a co-created sound sensor is now being used in a large-scale project in Flanders in order to assess the sound quality and the sound levels within specific cities. If you want to do this in the context of soil health, you should be organizing yourself for more grassroots bottom-up initiatives where you have farmers or other, let's say, practitioners, and you support them. You would have some funding from the projects itself. So there should also be some basic funding, because also in our example, it were not the citizen activism groups that funded the project. It was IMEC that also co-funded these projects. So you need some buy-in and you need some funding for this. And activities, the thing is that you need, if you have farmer-driven or practitioner-driven innovation, you need this innovation mindset. So if you're thinking about a living lab being set up more as a user-driven living lab, you also need the right users and the right mindset among these users. This is a mindset that you can train, that you can practice, but you need to work on this, and you need to know, is this in line, is this in sync, what my end users or my stakeholders have in mind. And then last but not least, researcher-driven living labs. I was talking about City of Things, but this was a larger flagship project that we did. It ran ran a couple of years. It was an IoT, Internet of Things, reference living lab and technology lab in Europe. So it was both local and international that we received it, and it had a lot to do with IoT services and applications and technologies, and how we could use this new IoT boom that was taking place back then. I think we started about 7 or 8 years ago, so it was still mostly in a starting stage and it's in its infancy. And we had a large scale, real life and real time smart city environment. So we started in Antwerp, but we scaled up to Flanders in a later stage. And one example there, what we did in order to test and try out. So we had this common infrastructure that we did to do some research upon, but we also had concrete projects also to collect data and to see how this data collection and how these how other things linked to this data collection and to making sense of this data, visualizing the data, etc. So we had different projects to do that, and one was, for example, a collaboration with the Belgian Post, in which we mounted sensors that sensed the air quality, in which we then had a real-time measures of air quality based on the sensor. Normally, the air quality is measured by static sensors. These were moving sensors but it also came with a lot of issues, of course, because these sensors, they needed a better connectivity, needed then some models to correct from some biases, etc. So a lot of research was done, but this was an example of one of the projects which we did within City of Things. So here again, different way of organizing. There, the main focus was advancing, applying, and valorizing IoT research, mainly via academia. Sorry, I was wrong to click. Local authorities, government funding, and citizens. But you also see it was quite a complex organization. So the main goal was research, application, and advancing research, but we needed local authorities for the permits. For example, for the bpost, we need to collaborate with bpost in order to have these sensors on their roofs of their cars. So we needed permits for that. We needed also government funding. And also the citizens. In the case of bpost, citizens were only involved with the dashboards if we had dashboards with air quality, but in other projects, citizens were also played an important part. So it was quite complex to set up and sustain this living lab. So projects were IoT related, technology applications and services. So we had a base funding, but we also had project funding. So it was trying to combine public funding and project funding from companies. And activities, it was citizens, it was all this group that I already mentioned, but it was really hard to balance these three interests. Yeah, some projects were more for citizens, some were more for public authorities, but the main thing was, by its research nature, this from time to time conflicted with the goals for public authorities who wanted more to have concrete outcomes, whereas research is still research at some point, which still needs some further steps in order to have very practical outcomes and direct implementable solutions. So that was quite hard to balance and to manage between these interests. And this is also that I heard sometimes the issue with the agroecology living labs from Canada, which we saw in the example. There also the main start is from research. So it's always hard to balance the interest of the research organization with the public authority. It's feasible, and when it's done, it can lead to very good results, but it's hard to manage that. So you need to think very good upfront. So in terms of soil health, if you think about research-driven living labs, it's about testing and applying academic research in soil health, and that is the main focus. Then you need local authorities, monitoring infrastructure, and reference cases to do that. In terms of projects, it's about processes, technology, and interventions. And you are looking for societal impacts, for spin-offs, and for licensing. That is the main end goal. And this should be aligned so that you know, or that you have the option that, okay, this research has potential to be valorized and has potential to spin off to have a real impact. And that this is also managed in terms of the organization and in terms of the expectation of the funding local authority. And in terms of activity, yeah, it's working together with other researchers, practitioners, and citizens. And the real goal is that you valorize your research by real-life testing, that you really put it to the test. In Canada, it's in then different locations, and to see how does my research hold? Does it also, is this new way of harvesting crops, for example, is it also applicable in different regions? And what are the characteristics that influence these activities so that you can have really lessons learned and take your innovation to the next level? Okay, these were 5 generic, let's say generic types of living labs based on the actor who is really leading or driving the living lab. So if you take this into account, what are now for me 4 tips that I want to give you in order to sustain your living lab? What should you think of, and what should you take into account? And for me, are these 4 laws or 4 innovation and business model tips that can also be applied to, let's say, more general business modeling, but I will give an example specifically for the living lab context. So the first one, what is your purpose? What is the purpose of your living lab? What is it that you want to achieve, and what drives you in this endeavor? And you already saw, it's from the examples that it can be quite complex, that you can have a lot of stakeholders, that you can have sometimes conflicting ideas. So you really need a very good purpose, a good vision or a good mission in which to focus upon. If you have this purpose, then focus. Think about who is your primary stakeholder. So who is the one who will take a bit the lead in your living lab, and what are their needs, and what is really their vision and their mission, so that you can link the rest to this primary stakeholders. It's not that the other stakeholders are not important, but this one primary stakeholder, which normally will also be in some way funding. And then purpose focus differentiation. What are your unique assets and value creation? As a living lab, you will also be in a way sometimes competing with other programs, with other approaches. So really make clear what are these other alternatives or other approaches, and what makes you unique. Is it assets? Is it some value? Or what is the value that you're creating? Is it maybe your network? Is it your consortium that you have? But really think through, how am I differentiating from the rest? And then in terms of the business model itself, coherence. So make sure that you have a good business model design, that you know that you have enough resources, and that you don't have resources per project, but that you have a view how you will sustain your living lab after 1 or more projects have ended, so that you have a sustainable revenue. So be consistent in the choices, that you don't conflict between the different actors in your living lab, and make sure that you evolve over time. And we saw some examples of living labs that evolved over time, that started some with a narrow focus, which is very good, have a clear focus, but over time this focus can maybe widen or maybe change. But if you consciously think about that, if you think about the coherence, then you might evolve over time, and then you might become sustainable over the years. So first step one, so how can you have this purpose? This is basically starting from a strategic analysis, defining the culture, your vision, and your mission, and then link to that, think about your business model. So basically, this is about how you can think about culture, vision, and mission. But this is a strategic exercise that you need to do. Who are my main stakeholders, and what do we really want to achieve? What is our vision, and what is our mission that we want to achieve over a couple of years? So also set a time frame, I would say. Having a mission over 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer, helps you to really get that vision straight. So tip 2, the focus, and I think there, the framework that I gave can really help you to focus. So who is the primary stakeholder? How will you provide value via your living lab and via the services or the projects that you will do? So you can choose, is it the utilizer? Will I focus on customers? Will I attract innovators and provide something to them so that these innovators can, via the services of your living lab, can increase TRL levels and can increase or advance in their innovation process? Is the enabler the main actor? So then it's the resource provider. Typically, it could be public sector or public entity. Then you will need to see that your living lab is able to achieve some policy goals, and you need to work on everything so that the policy goals are achieved. Otherwise, you will lose your funding, of course. So that is then the main entry point. Is it a provider-driven living lab? Then you should be thinking about infrastructure and the infrastructure itself. Is there the main key focus point of your living lab? Developing the infrastructure, so getting cases, getting tests, getting experiments, getting projects on your infrastructure is the main thing. So then you need to think, do we have some kind of infrastructure that is still in need of testing, and that we could use some location to do that or multiple locations to do that? Then you would have a provider-driven living lab, and mainly reason from the interests of this provider. Do we have a user-driven living lab? But then you need innovative and active co-creators among these users. Then you would need the right users to do that, to really anchor all of your living lab activities to your users as the dominant actor. And so note, it's always a dominant actor. The other actors are also active in most of the living labs, but it's about who is the dominant actor. So it's really makes sense to clearly think that through. And last but not least, researchers. Are we mainly working on research? Then it's about valorization. It's research valorization. Then we need to think, what kind of research need this real-life testing, need this active co-creation in order to see, are we on the right track and can we advance the research? But this will also, of course, have an impact on your funding. And then the funding should come from research grants or from some authority or maybe from industry that also believes in your research and that funds your living lab in order to valorize to advance your research. So very important in terms of focus, who is the main actor? Then what are your unique assets and value creators? Your differentiation, and like in the Doll Living Lab, there, the example, it's a one-stop shop, for example. That's very unique there. Also, you don't need to think about permits, and you could maybe use other service providers to test it in some government or in some other city, but then you would need to city administration, get the permits, etc. Doll fixes that for you. So they're one-stop shop. They have some also unique assets, which are more or less plug and play. And they are also very good at balancing added value for innovators, but also for the municipalities itself, who also get a very innovative image. So that's their unique differentiation, I would say. So think what makes you stand out and what makes you unique. And then finally, the coherence, the good design, the consistency in your business model choices and evolution over time, I would say. And as Living Lab, because you are working intensively with your ecosystem, with your stakeholders, you are in a very good position to be evolving over time, to receive early signals, And this is an example from IMEC, from our revenue streams. So we got regional grants 20%, government funded 3%, EU programs 5%. And for us, the majority is industry. So you see that we have spread of our income and that we balance this income and that we look for different ways, different revenue streams. And some examples, you can have revenue for testing, other services that you sell to innovators. You can have membership fees, funding subsidies can be part of your funding, can be licensing. But I think it's best to have some kind of a balance within this portfolio to sustain your living lab over time. And also this will evolve in terms of your customers, in terms of your utilizers, and in terms of the ones who is driving the living lab. Okay, this was my presentation. I hope I was not too fast and didn't use too many examples, but I think there's some room for questions, or did I go over time?
Yeah, you you are on time.
Okay.
Dimitri, so we have 5 minutes. So thanks for the comprehensive overview. And if you have any questions, so please voice it or include it in the chats. Natalia?
May I start?
Yeah, sure.
Hello, Dmitry. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. Actually, I used your papers for my research for Living Labs, and I really appreciated four-fold typology. Today you introduced, I think, five-fold typology, but in 2015 there was four-fold typology of the Living Labs, and I usually introduce it when we're discussing different types of Living Lab. But today I realized that you mostly described urban living labs. I mean, living labs working only in urban area and their features and their differences. I work in the more for agri-food sector, and all living labs that we are working on are rural and created are in rural context. And from my experience, created agroecological living lab, we identified as utilizer driven. I'm not sure if it's correctly, because this living lab was focused mostly on territorial development. So they applied agroecological principles, but they focused their activities, and their main goal was improvement of territorial development. So my question is it correct to use this definition of utilizer-driven living lab for agroecological living lab created in rural area? And which are the main differences that might be identified between rural living labs and urban living labs in your typology? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question. And I tried to make some links with examples that I know from agroecology, but I think both and all 5 types can apply in your context. And by how you describe it, it could also be in the neighbor-driven living lab, I think. If it's really in the interests of the region that is funding the living lab, then it's mostly, I would say, in the neighbor-driven lab, because you work and you set up this living lab mostly in the interest of the region, of the local authority. Utilizer-driven is when the focus is on innovators. If you have different innovators coming to your agroecology living lab, then I would say it's more a utilizer-driven. It depends a little bit on the main scope and the main focus of the projects. But as you were telling it, I would say it's mostly a neighbor-driven living lab, where you have the local authority or the region funding with some goals, and then you set up everything in order to achieve these specific goals. And in the utilizer, it's a focus that is different. Then the focus is really on getting innovators come to your living lab, external innovators that come to test in your living lab. Both you can maybe start sometimes from an enabler-driven, and that at some point you evolve into the utilizer-driven. But I wanted to show you these archetypes, which for me also apply to your context in terms of vision. Okay, what do we really want to achieve in the shorter term? Is it to have these regional goals, or is it to foster innovation in the agroecology region?
No, mostly regional development, because with innovations, it's like not really easygoing. It's mostly for improvement of territorial development and territorial issues, because in rural areas, innovations are not all of them are really well welcomed and could be applied immediately and have provide benefits in a short-term perspective. So in rural context, it's mostly like for, in general, rural development, and participants are focused on this.
Yeah, and I think that there it's mostly will start from an enabler-driven context, that there's one enabler that really dominates at the vision and the mission of the Living Lab. But I would say over time, this could change, or this should change. Because if you achieve positive results, then there might be a mindset that is shifting, that becomes more innovative, that you could do some more, let's say, out-of-the-box experiments. And then it could evolve into, for example, a utilizer-driven Living Lab, or if there's some infrastructure that could be used. But I think, as you explain it, that it will mostly start as an enabler-driven Living Lab. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Dimitri, we have another question in the chat. So it's from the Climatorium in Denmark. In order to sustain in Living Labs, do you have any advice or experiences for the Living Lab organization, for the administrative infrastructure, the managing the Living Lab data, results, projects, etc.?
Yeah, a good question. This is more about how you set up your Living Lab. This is in a lot of cases a problem, because Living Labs people are mostly known for being doers, that love to do a lot of stuff, but you need different types and you need different roles in your Living Lab there. So it would make sense from the start. So mostly you have some kind of a project manager, and in a lot of Living Labs for the start, it's only that one profile, but you need these different profiles. You need like project manager that is really good at managing projects. You need like a business developer, business development manager, which is good at attracting funding or attracting customers or interacting with your stakeholders. But then a pilot manager is then someone who is really good at more like the methodology. So it comes down to balancing these roles. So in this case, the administrative infrastructure, it would make sense to already quite soon have a profile on board. So it mainly comes to diversify your team, not only have a team of, let's say, Living Lab enthusiasts, but also it's like a startup. A Living Lab is like running a startup, and you need all these kind of profiles. One who is thinking more in an innovative way, one is thinking more about the money, and also one who is thinking about the infrastructure and about the managing of this data, which can be, if it's about data, it's more like, I would say, a research profile. If it's more administration, yeah, it's really an administrative profile. So there, for me, it's about balancing the core team of your Living Lab from the start.
Very well. So Dimitri, the one last question. Financing is really challenging for soil health Living Labs. The knowledge created in the Living Lab is often not able to patent, nor something totally new, etc. This makes the industry less willing to pay for it. Do you have any idea for solutions on financing?
Yeah, but the thing is there that you can set this up from the start. At some point way back, it was then more in the context of ICT innovation. We had this Living Lab, but there were from the start clearly contracts which were allowing this, and you can have a contract on a project basis. That you in a product, even you can even have NDAs in the project basis. That's why you need to use these layers, that you can set up a Living Lab organization, but then you enable some kind of industry projects in which you could secure, or you could make sure that the knowledge generated in the project is in a way can be used for a patent or for a license. So it comes down to then having, let's say, a legal expert also in your Living Lab. I'm not the full expert of that, but I know people are working on that, and we have some people working on these legal issues. And for me, the solution there is that you have a separate service, a separate project model for industry.
Very nice, Dimitri. So I think we let you go.
Yes, I need to catch a flight, but thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you
And I
for
will
your
send the
time.
slides.
Yeah. So our next speaker is Evdokimos Konstantinidis. He is postdoctoral research associate at Thessaloniki in Greece, Living Lab, and chairperson of the European Network of Living Labs. So Evdokimos will present the newly launched Axel Lab. It's a service that brings together businesses with Living Labs research infrastructures. So welcome, Evdokimos, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alberto. Hi everyone. Hi, Albert. Hi, Michelle. I really enjoyed Dimitri's presentation, so I'll try to accept the challenge and try to make it even equally actually good. Axel App is about not that focus to soil, but focus to all the living labs, soil living labs included. I'm Evdokimos Konstantinidis, researcher at the Lab of Medical Physics and Digital Innovation, chairperson of ANOL, and I was the project coordinator of Vitalize project. And Axel App is an exploitable outcome of the Vitalize project. I'm sure that you have already heard about what living labs are, maybe yesterday, but I will go through it really quickly in order to show the challenge, in order to conclude to how important is that all the challenges to sustain and develop a living lab and also to conduct experiments in a living lab are challenges that many researchers face. And I will explain why. So living labs are open innovation ecosystems in real-life environments based on a systematic user co-creation approach that integrates research, innovation activities in communities, placing citizens at the center of innovation. This is the definition of that NOL uses. So we can think that living labs operate as intermediaries among the actors of the quadruple helix. They are open innovation ecosystem in real life environments using iterative feedback process. Let's see the components one by one. We say that living labs are open innovation ecosystems. And when we say open, we mean that open innovation, open because it's about tapping on the knowledge and know-how that exists outside of the organization by engaging with others. So living labs actually know how to integrate, how to collaborate with externals, and know how to create this environment of trust that eliminates the fears of sharing with others knowledge, etc., than about the competition and all this stuff. My personal experience is that in the past, when we had to do innovation, all the organization, especially when it was about research organizations or academia and companies, external companies, it was to split what tasks are for the research group and what tasks are for the company in order to make sure that the IPs that are created belong to the organization without having this joint IP development. Now with Living Labs, and I think with open innovation, it's the opposite, which means that they work together in order to create innovation, and then they have all the mechanisms in order to protect the IPs and make sure that there is space for business for everyone. We say that Living Labs are in real life environments. And by real life environments, I'm sure you understand what we mean. We go to the city, we go to the parks, we go to the hospitals, we go to the field. But the challenge is when you go there is that you have to face, or actually you have to make sure that you bring everyone together in order to create innovation, because you cannot create an innovative product or methodology for a customer if you don't have the suppliers, the retailers, the advisors, the researchers. And this goes for all. So everybody needs to create value for the others, and this must be clear that everybody creates a value for the others. And living labs are based on systematic user co-creation approach. Co-creation is not something new. It was not brought up by Living Labs. It was there before Living Labs. What Living Labs brought in the co-creation is this systematic user co-creation, which means that there are specific tools that are used, specific methodologies, approved methodologies, improved methodologies, and methodologies that are keep improving based on the feedback coming from all the Living Labs. As you can see in this slide, for the different phases of innovation, exploration, experimentation, evaluation, there are different tools that can be used. And there are methodologies like the one that is based on design thinking, where we have the problem identification, the solution identification, then the deployment. But what Living Labs do actually is that once you have the deployment of the solution that creates value for the end users, they close the loop. They have this iterative design in order for the Living Lab to learn. Because actually, Living Labs are not about just about delivering solution, but also creating knowledge. And creating knowledge even at the deployment phase, when you create insights about the long-term adoption of the innovation, and then you feed back the loop in order for the Living Lab to improve. And there are many living labs. It's not only in soil, it's not only health. You can see that there are many, many different living labs. In this, someone could ask, do these living labs, can these living labs collaborate? And yes, they can collaborate. And we call them regional innovation hubs, because a living lab is actually an innovation, a local innovation ecosystem which shares trust among all the actors of the quadruple helix. And why innovation hubs or regional innovation hubs? Because imagine that you would like to see the quality of life of farmers, which means that you would like soil living labs, but also health and well-being living labs to collaborate together. And from the researcher point of view, from the client point of view that would like to utilize such a living lab, they don't care if it is one living lab or the other. They would like one solution. And this one solution could come from the smooth collaboration of the two living labs, of the soil living lab and the health living lab that work in the same region. Both living labs share the same principles. They use similar methodologies, and the similar methodologies, harmonized methodologies, because we have also the harmonization working group that works towards this. And for the researcher is one solution. And living labs provide state-of-the-art technology, recent, latest technology, or even technology or equipment that you cannot researchers cannot find in their research groups or in the academic organizations, like really special equipment. And also, living labs by default are supporting the disciplinary studies. They can bring expertises that are needed for an experiment, and also are easily accessible to researchers and scientists, regardless of their location institution, because most of the times there are ways to conduct an experiment either physically or being there or remotely. And they are really flexible because they provide many, many services. Here is an example of some health services, but I'm sure that you, in the soil domain, you know the different services that you can provide. And also provide this, as I said before, the iterative feedback process where living labs create knowledge and they can adapt. And they can adapt fast. This is one of the key things of the living labs. They are open, so a living lab, it is open by default, which, and by open we mean that anybody can submit a proposal to a living lab in order to be conducted in the premises of the living lab. And also they provide, starting from an all, but also all the living labs, they provide capacity building programs in order, on the one hand, to increase the capacity of researchers who want to develop, build their own living labs. But on the other hand, how researchers can use existing living labs. And this is the key point, how researchers can use existing living labs, because this is linked with the sustainability. I make a parenthesis here. In our case, the Thessaloniki Action for Health and Wellbeing Living Lab, it started and it was developed as a living lab in order to serve our needs, the researchers of the same the living lab. But when we saw the value of the living lab, we started also opening it to externals, so externals can also get benefit of the living lab. So we should think of a living lab that supports, serves the needs of the researchers of the living lab, but also external researchers. And this is the key point. And this means that you need to have methodologies and processes and procedures on how externals can access your living lab. And living lab also pay a special attention to ethical consideration because living labs means humans involvement and also data management. And finally, the living labs have this certification that's provided by Enol, and they have also the harmonized KPIs in order to make sure that living labs, there is a seal of quality. So what we tried to do in Vitalize was to make living labs findable as research infrastructures, to make living labs findable in order for external researchers, and by researchers, I mean coming either from academia or research groups, or even from a company, a large or an SME, a large company or SME. So we try to make living labs findable, and they are already findable in the European Open Science Cloud. And also we try to make living labs interoperable. And this is why we created the living lab harmonization.com. You can go and you can visit this website and see the harmonized procedures and services. But also we have the harmonization group which works towards this direction. And also accessible. So externals that find the living lab can access this living lab. So what AxeLab is, it's a marketplace where clients can find solutions for their challenges by booking living labs. So actually, AxeLab responds to this need for speed in the innovation and prototyping, which is actually a slow process and difficult to access, actually. So AxeLab actually gives this make or buy. When you are a startup, a new company, and you want to create innovation, let's say a smart sensor and tractor, you have to make the decision of make or buy. And this is about the IPs or the focus of the company. So if you are interested in the sensor, you make the sensor, but you buy the environment for the experimentation. So you buy the environment for experimenting, you buy the living lab. And what I mean by buying, developing and sustaining a living lab takes a lot of resources and many years. As living labs are based in the trust among all the actors, creating a living lab, it might take 3, 4, 5 years. A living lab that effectively can give access to researchers. Developing or making such a living lab, if you are a company, in order to experiment for one sensor or one methodology, it doesn't make any sense to the companies. So the companies need to understand that they can buy this environment of experimentation, effective environment of experimentation, in a case that they're gonna start the experimentation in next month, let's say, instead of building something that would take 3 or more years. And AxeLab actually is, as I said, an outcome of the Vitalize project. Was an AIDS 2020 project. And actually, some partners of the Vitalize Consortium joined forces with the mission to aggregate demand in a way to bridge demand and supply for living labs as research infrastructures. And how we are changing the paradigm, there are many marketplaces where you can where living labs can sell their services. In AxeLab, the difference is that you look for solutions. So the clients of AxeLab can go to the website, post their project, their challenge, and look for a solution. It's not about buying different services from the living labs in order to create their own solutions, but actually you post your need, your challenge, and then the living labs can bid with their complete solutions of taking care of all the details. I have a video here.
Evdokimos, I don't know if the video was supposed to have sound.
It has sound, but most probably you cannot hear it, but it's just the background music. So apologies for this. So I'm going to explain. You post a project, you receive some bids from certified living labs, and then you can choose a living lab to collaborate with based on your own criteria. So the platform is not about deciding which match is the best. See how I can continue this. So AxeLab is a collaboration, a place for innovators and accredited testing providers. And when we say accredited, we mean that the testing providers or the experimentation, the partners that can provide the experimentation expertise are certified living labs. And why certified? Because this keeps creates a seal of quality. So the value for the clients is that they can access certified experimentation spaces, living labs, get solutions to challenges and not pieces to design their own solutions. The experiment that I use, the example that I use, that you buy services from different marketplaces in order to develop your own solution. You get ready solutions. You have access to innovation ecosystems worldwide. So clients can find living labs beyond their ecosystem. For instance, I'm a researcher in Greece. I have an innovative product and I would like to penetrate the German market. So I can look for a living lab that is in Germany and they can cover the full innovation journey. While the benefits for the living labs is that they have additional, they can create additional revenues for the living labs. They can see the cost of the services that are provided by other living labs, so they can start also calculating the cost for their own services, and they have access to market for living labs, and they build awareness for seekers and providers. You can go to the platform axelab.eu and see how it works. If you are a certified living lab, or if you have been a certified living, if you were a certified living lab last year, most probably you have received also the communication from the platform when it was launched. Here you can see how it looks like, but you can create your own account as a researcher, not as a living lab, and you can see how it looks like. We have 170 living labs so far registered with more than 400 contacts. We mean the living lab managers of the living labs, and also 40 registrations from non-living labs. Here you can see some infrastructures from the health domain, but imagine having your own infrastructures, soil living labs and lighthouses. And these are the contact details. Thank you, Alberto. Shall I stop sharing?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Efdo. So we don't have much time, but we can collect one or two questions. So if you have any question, please voice it or include it in the chat. Okay, there's no question. So thank you, Efdo, very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day. And we are moving to the next presenter, yeah? Okay, so our next speaker is Michael Kafarakis. He's CEO of the Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center, also based in Greece and an old member. Michael will introduce a hands-on case with MaxSoil, a pioneering initiative in soil health and sustainability with a singular multi-stakeholder governance structure. So, Michael, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Can you hear me
Yes.
properly?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And you also see the sharing of the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I am going today to share with you a few thoughts about what we are doing here in Crete, Greece. Evdokimos that had the floor before has supported very much these initiatives that I'm going to present in the next minutes. And also there are many different typologies, as already has been declared here, about what is a living lab and the living lab process and idea. I'm going to give a few insights from what we have in mind when we were developing our living lab. So today we are going to discuss about the Max Soil. The Max Soil is a living lab established in Heraklion, Crete, and it covers Crete, but also it has many connections to the rest of Greece. So in this living lab, there is a community under it, and this is what I'm going to present today, that enables the opportunities for the establishment of the living lab. So today I'm going to present an approach in order to sustain or develop a living lab. And prior to this, I'm going to discuss about the MAC initiative. So MAC is the Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center. It is a private company. It is operating in Greece. So it has a form of an enterprise. It has 48 partners all over Greece from various different sectors, and this is actually the strength of this movement, of this idea, the number of participants or stakeholders, let's say better, in this company. And it also spans all different areas of the quadruple helix. So in this company, there are partners, stakeholders from the area of plastics. First of all, I have to say that the Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center, it's a competence center. So the very establishment of this organization was about the motivation and the appearance of competencies in the market of the agro-food sector. So from soil, from seeds, to supermarkets, to food waste, to food production, and all the processes of the value chain of the food. So Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center spans in the quadruple helix, as I already said. So there are companies that deals with plastics, chemicals, and agro suppliers. There are companies that are cooperative, so there are many farmers there. Laboratories in the area of active enterprises analyzing or supporting businesses from the area of analysis to food sector. ICT, of course, this is a horizontal community and it is important to whatever the endeavor is today. Vocational training centers in order to support the people and the personnel. The society, so there are different organizations that are unions of people and also media in order to give the opportunity to take out the results and communicate the results to the market and to the other companies. Of course, there are companies that they are working with the packaging and the production of products, of food products. Organizations for development, and this is the governmental part of the quadruple helix. So as the previous one was the market side and the society side. And then, of course, the academia, which is the research side, as you can see here in the right blue arrows. And of course, there are several companies that they are operating as business advisors. So why am I presenting this structure? This is the backbone of a system when you want to create cooperation. And the interesting thing that is happening while you have this system fixed is that whenever you came up with a question inside this system, there's always 2 or 3 different companies, organizations, governmental bodies that they already have the answer, or the question of the one party is the answer of the other party, or the byproducts of the one is the main products of the other. So without putting a lot of effort, the solutions to the problems seems to appear inside a system like this one. So what is Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center practically does? The idea is to transform the result of the research to products that are desirable by the users, and vice versa. So it's a system that creates the connections or transfer the knowledge or transfer the know-how in order to make things happen. So you can go either bottom up or top down. And when I'm saying bottom or top, it doesn't mean anything. I'm just explaining the diagram in the right. So you start perhaps with a research outcome that comes from a university, but then you need the technological part. So you must create a device. You must put it in a concrete situation. And then you have all this business model and implementation strategy. And then if everything goes well, you will fulfill the consumer need. But it also goes vice versa. I guess yesterday you must have seen diagrams like this. So I'm not going to spend more time on this, but it is very crucial and it's very important to understand that when you have a system that you have all the quadruple helix partners in it with some management of it, you can produce products, you can fulfill needs, or you can transfer the needs for fulfillment to whatever research is happening. And it is not only in the universities, because we have companies that today they are doing a lot of job like this. So MAC is applied to several different issues. A central point of our operation is the resilience of the companies, but also of the communities. So we are working on the mitigating of the climate change. Here in the Mediterranean, it is very important because we have gradually and very fast at the late years seeing the phenomena of climate change. We are working towards a sustainable agri-food and self-efficiency model. We have many examples that leads the way towards these situations. The economic and nutritional product value improvement. So we need to add value to the already existing products. The automation in the production, smart farming lacks a lot from the agro-food sector, and we need to implement it there. And of course, the development of human resources, since if you don't have human resources in a level that it is adequate, then you have you run in many problems. So the way we are doing this is that we are working towards the knowledge transfer, but also towards the development of solutions inside the system. Here, I would like to say a few things of how we understand the idea of Living Lab. So Living Lab is a system that, first of all, needs to settle down the interior of the Living Lab, so the stakeholders of the Living Lab, so the system itself, but at the same time, a Living Lab has to be has to have enough resources to give to the rest of the people, to give to the rest of the community or the rest of the companies the tools and the ideas and the information on what is happening inside the Living Lab. So in order the Living Lab to be active and applicable, needs to take care of its inner environment, but also at the same time to take care of the environment outside the Living Lab. So here is another process on how we are operating on the PREPSOIL Living Lab, which is a living lab that is built on the basis of the competence center of the MAC, of the Mediterranean Agrofoods Competence Center. So what is happening there is that we identify and describe the need of the product. Then we record the characteristics and what the solution should look like. Then we find the collaborators. We run a cost estimation and see if the whole system gathered makes sense. And then we provide the services to the people that they need them. Of course, this process can also go vice versa. So you can start from the demand of services and go to the cost estimation and finally define the final product by gathering the proper network each time. So the main idea here is the competencies that we have registered them. We know which stakeholder can offer which service, and therefore we can deliver the service later on. So let's go to a few examples, since otherwise what I'm saying is perhaps a little vague and not well understood. So when we're talking about smart farming, we found out that the smart farming is lacking from what is the standard, not only all over Europe, but also in the rest of Greece. So we need some application that would be cheap and it would be applicable in the farmers to put them in their fields. Because when you have, okay, let me first explain something. Here in Crete, we have small fields. We have producers that are not big companies, and therefore it's not easy to apply costly applications in the fields. So when we are talking about smart farming, these smart farming solutions has to be cheap and has to be easily applied. So what we did is that we created a network, a LoRaWAN network, on which people could easily just plug their sensors and then receive information on what the cultivation should be, on when they have to start or stop irrigation, and many other things, including if there are some diseases coming for the main cultivations of olive trees and also the vineyards. So the system finally looks like something like this. And people are also above to this data. They are receiving information to explain what they have to do to run proactively. So this system created by the partners of the Living Lab, of the MAC, Mediterranean Agrofoods Competence Center Living Lab. So what we did is that we had a one of the partners offering sensors, the other is offering agricultural advices, and with no much effort, we finally created a smart farming application that now it is ready and running, and it is offering this information. As Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center, we took the management of the whole project. For this case, we did it, although this is not the usual case for us, but we decided as an initiative that we would like to pinpoint its importance to act on this manner and create the system. And we also have called it Smart Agrogenius. If you enter our website, you can find it. Now, another initiative that it came also from the producers of milk here in Greece. Now, this one is all over Greece, but it is also has application in Crete. The sheep wool is going to the waste. So no one is going to collect the sheep wool or to use the sheep wool in some of its applications. So there was a question, what can we do with the sheep wool? It was a company from West Macedonia that came and asked this question. And after gathering all the resources inside this Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center, so here again you see the competence that exists and you can work with it. And finally, we came up with a fertilizer. So one of the companies inside MAC had the problem. What shall we do with sheep wool when it's hair cutted from the sheep? Another provider was inside this cluster again, and he said, okay, what we can do is create some fertilizer. And so we created the fertilizer, and another partner again inside the system is a supermarket. So finally, this product is now in the supermarket. It is selling. It is in the shelves and selling. So this is another example that what we did is that to prevent soil or to enhance soil or to use a circular economy solution in soil, we gather all the competencies, and finally we end up with a product without any of us to be a fertilizer producer or to be a supermarket itself, etc. The partners had the abilities, and we just applied these abilities without creating new competencies. So in MAC Soil, there are also several other products. Like for instance, we offer to the MAC Soil partners networking, and this is very crucial because when you don't let people communicate, you do not come up with new solutions, and we have manifested this several times. So we, from time to time, gather them together in different occasions in order to communicate them between them and, of course, with us. We also have to understand that the Living Lab idea and also the Competence Center idea is based on a project. So when you have a project, you have a cooperation. When you don't have a project, you do not motivate people and there is our companies, and so you have nothing. So all this idea of living labs or competence centers or clusters or whatever cooperatives, it is important to have in mind that it is all project-based. So you have a project, you show the road and people follow, if of course everything else is set up properly. There are also other initiatives having to do with detection of, this is a product that it has been created inside also the Living Lab. It is a molecular detection of Legionella strains. It is the same setup that is predicting the coronavirus. And of course, we have on this infrastructure of the Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center, we have developed the Max Soil Living Lab. So let's have a look on what is this system. So the system is based in Crete. It is dedicated to the soil. But when we are talking for soil, you very much are aware that we're not talking only about soil. We are talking about the environment. We're talking about the behaviors. We're talking about the people. We are talking about all this information that is vital for the sustainability of our planet, from microplastics to whatever else things you can discuss. So the Max Soil Living Lab is concentrated now on soil, while the Mediterranean Agro-Food Competence Center is concentrated to the whole chain of the food production. But it seems that the soil is very closely connected to nearly all the parts of the production of the food. So it's the Max Soil is concentrated and dedicated to the maintaining of soil integrity, to the control of soil conditioners and formulations, so the creation of new products, the creation of soil improvers, the creation and control of biostimulants, the soil resilience, and the increasing of the production efficiency. So all these strands, you can see that there are materialized in several different products, like for example, the creation of biostimulants. Biostimulants are products that are going to replace the fertilizers, and they are offering a lot of benefits for both the environment and also the plants. It's also about promoting circular economy actions. We are already 3 different actions running now all over Greece about circular economy for the byproducts of the food production. The development of new environmentally friendly products, like for instance, the supermarket bags. We have created the substances for supermarket bags that they are biodegradable and have several similar good qualities. A huge and very important part is the training of the farmers, but not only the farmers, all the value chain where it has to do with the soil. We do market research and promotion of new technologies and innovation. And of course, we are working with the rating of different materials, for biostimulants to greenhouse cover plastics. And we are very active on the addressing of water scarcity. For instance, the system that I told you, the smart farming system, the smart agrogenius as we call it, is a system that its main purpose is to manage to sustain the water, since people are watering without need of watering. And usually this is the main problem why there's not enough water, since irrigation is done without any real measurements, and it's more or less a little abstract. So the very operation of a living lab is actually based on the competencies. And since the as far as you have created a competence center or a set of competencies or a competencies pool, then it's very easy above this to develop a living lab, because living lab at the end is about the competencies. So here I have devised another structure that shows how this whole thing may work on the basis of a competence center system. And you have the identification of the challenges again. Then you have to find what is innovative that could be applied on these challenges. You apply and test, and then you redefine what the new challenges are after this application that you made. So this final loop, which is an iterative loop, which finally drives to a development, again, using a quadruple helix system. So here again, I give you a small example of what our partners and collaborations are inside this competence system on which the Soil Living Lab is operating and working. We are active in many different areas, from product creation to European projects implementation, since this lab is already existing, and it is actually a living lab, because everything is happening inside the companies and inside the partners that are participating in the competence center. And okay, that's enough for now. You can find us in this address at the top, and I'm open to answer any questions that may appear from what we already discussed before. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mikhail. Very interesting case, and we can collect 1 or 2 questions. So if you have them, please voice it or include it in the chat. Okay, Mikhail. So we have no questions. So thank you very much.
I thank you very much. Thank you.
And we'll move next to the next speaker. So, hi, Oliver.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Good.
So our next speaker is Oliver Phipps. He's partner of the Environmental Resource Management Advisory Firm and member of the Network for Industrially Coordinated Sustainable Land Management in Europe. Oliver will focus on the impact that industry can make on soil health and will present ideas and recommendations around developing and communicating business cases to investors and decision makers. Oliver, thanks for joining, and the floor is yours.
Very good. I'll share my screen, Alberto. I think it's easier, isn't it? And then, because I've got some... sorry, just want to make sure you can... there we are. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, I'm going to minimize this, so I won't be able to see if anyone's putting their hand up or anything. So if you could, that'd be great. Thanks, Alberto, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. As you say, I'm a partner at ERM. Been with ERM for a very long time, which is, you know, a global sustainability consulting company. And I'm also been a long-term member of Nicole, and I'm speaking on behalf of both ERM and Nicole today. And so my main client base is industry across a wide range of sectors. So I work a lot with the chemical sector, but also oil and gas, mining, pharmaceutical, and manufacturing and others. So I suppose what I want to do today is just share some ideas of what we're seeing with industry and how they actively and have been for years contribute to soil health, but also some ideas of where they could be contributing further in the future as we move towards healthy soils in the EU. Having mentioned the EU, you know, I'm a Brit, but I consider myself very European. So I've lived many, many years in France and was in fact born in France. And a lot of my wife's family is German. So I have European connections, and in my heart, I am a European. So I feel kind of legitimate to talk today. So to kick off, so, you know, there's, you know, I don't need to repeat these, the 8 missions of the EU soil mission. And I think, you know, what is really interesting is industry already or can contribute to at least 5 of these, potentially more, but at least 5. So industry is regularly thinking about organic carbon stocks, and I'll show some examples around that. Clearly, they've got a contribution to make in terms of reuse of urban soils and making sure that we're not just simply gobbling up greenfield, but reuse of brownfield and putting that back to productive use. Soil pollution, that's my area of expertise technically. You know, all the responsible industry companies do a lot around that space and see it as a big risk which they need to manage. And the more progressive ones are also helping to enhance restoration. And I think they're going beyond, if you like, simply dealing with the pollution, but are helping to restore land as well. Preventing erosion, you know, that comes partly with just the engineering of a normal industrial facility. But again, there are many companies who are thinking about erosion and around soil protection more broadly. And a developing theme over the last, you know, certainly 3, 4, 5 years, even longer for some clients, has been in the area of biodiversity. All our industrial partners are putting in place biodiversity action plans and strategies, both in terms of protection, but also in terms of enhancement. And so I think there's many areas industry can cover. So there's kind of a number of topics I want to talk to today. So I want to use the example of how industry looks at sustainable land management, because I think there's some real overlap here between that and what the Living Labs and in overall the kind of improvement of soil health objectives. So I want to share a bit around that. A really key factor in building any business case is to have very clear indicators. So I want to share some thinking around that, which really align with ESG thinking or broad sustainability thinking. I want to share a couple of business cases, successful ones, just give some ideas, and then also some kind of tips and tricks around communicating business cases, both to investors but also decision makers. And then Alberto threw me a challenge, you know, and I kind of put it in my own words, which is how can soil health improvers connect to investors? Because it sounds like that's a bit of a challenge. So I've just got some ideas, some initial ideas, should we say, to share with you on that. Okay, so the evolving approach to sustainable land management, and really this has been evolving over the last 50 years. And I want to look at it just initially from a policy perspective, which really, and you know, let's be realistic, some countries still require people to clean to background. But most countries and regulatory environments have kind of evolved from that to really taking on board a strong risk-based approach to land, recognizing that you've got to balance the effort to clean up land with the value that that's going to generate. So coming up with a very much a risk-based approach, which, you know, progressively evolved into a broader thinking about sustainability, thinking about environment and social and economic. So really looking across the spectrum of sustainability. And then an evolving theme really over the last 5 years really is the contribution of, should we say, industrial land to the energy transition. And we're seeing many of our industrial clients looking at their properties and their assets as opportunities to develop hydrogen or carbon capture or you know, photovoltaic or many other different energy transition projects. And I think that's quite an interesting driver around policy at the moment and opportunity. So the flip side of that is what are different approaches and technologies that have been put in place over the last 50 years. And very much initially, it was very focused on essentially waste management. So treating the impacted soil as a waste and dealing with that, and really, and very kind of compliance driven, should we say. It kind of evolved. There were then some much more sort of intensive treatments that could be put in place, much more targeted, focused on the source area, as opposed to kind of, broad brush remediation approaches. With the onset of the kind of sustainability policy, that moved more into a more holistic thinking around sustainable remediation. What really makes sense to clean up? What actually doesn't present a risk and actually would create more environmental impact by digging it up than leaving it in place. And equally also really thinking about the kind of community benefit of the project and the land. And then really over the last sort of 5 years, there's been, some really key themes. Land stewardship being a sort of evolution of sustainable remediation, if you like. A lot of interest in nature-based solutions and being tied to kind of biodiversity opportunities. And then the third one, which is really coming to the fore, is thinking about climate resilience. So there are many cases where remediations have been put in place at a certain time, and due to climate change, groundwater levels have dropped or groundwater levels have risen, and actually that remediation solution is no longer appropriate. And so there's a lot of thinking at the moment around climate resilience of those solutions. Now, throughout that 50-year journey, the constant has been, for all the industrial companies, is thinking about how to manage their risk and their liability. That's been the driver. So, any listed companies have to disclose their risk and their liability. That's an important business procedure. And so consequently, they need to, that's been the sort of, the main driver behind the work. But really over the last sort of 10 years-ish, maybe a little longer, there's been equally a focus on value generation. So companies realizing that their industrial land is not just a problem, but actually an opportunity and something which can generate value. So I want to kind of, focus quite a lot on this kind of value generation theme. So moving on to indicators. So this is really super important in terms of being able to communicate business cases. So again, want to share some ideas from what we're seeing from industry. And so, start with financial, and then we'll move on to environmental and then social. So from a financial point of view, which, at the end of the day does matter when you're communicating to investors and decision makers, companies are thinking about the kind of the real estate opportunity of their land. They're thinking around how that land can generate cash, for example, from rental or from energy generation. They're thinking about how they can efficiently reduce their financial provisions. So obviously the provisions will take money off their profit and loss accounts and sit as reserves. And consequently, they think very hard around how to efficiently use those reserves. And then last but very much not least is around building investor and business confidence. Confidence is a critical factor which comes into play. From an environmental point of view, companies are really thinking about their improving their sustainability performance. They all set themselves, especially the global players, set themselves really ambitious targets, and they set them at the kind of global level. So in many places, they're going way beyond local compliance requirements. And it really matters. It really matters how they are performing against that. Companies are thinking about how they can create natural capital on their land. So, for example, biodiversity net gain, You know, on the flip side, really looking at how they can kind of reduce environmental impact. That again really matters to companies. Yeah, for example, soil pollution. And then the evolving goal, if you like, or indicator is how can these land assets contribute to meeting their company decarbonisation goals, and then more broadly, if you like, our global decarbonisation goals. And then last but certainly not least is the social dimension. And so, for example, ERM as a company, we measure how much land we help our clients return to productive use. So these are all, for example, brownfield sites, and how they can be transformed into new productive use, and that kind of reuse of brownfield. It really just doesn't make sense having brownfields sitting around not being used when there's so much need for land. Creating social capital, so kind of investment, or finding ways to generate community benefit and measuring that. Companies will think about how projects can improve their reputation. I think that's quite normal, and build their confidence with a broader stakeholder group. This is particularly a theme in the US, actually, sort of addressing environmental justice and social justice. There is a risk associated with that, which companies are thinking about. And I think what's really important to underline here is all of the above indicators can be quantified, and most can be monetized. And I'll come on to the kind of communicating around business cases, but that is really important when you're trying to communicate that business case. Okay, so a few examples just to whet the appetite. One is, this is coming from an ERM perspective. We do a lot of work with the mining industry, and there is one sure thing when a mine is opened, is that one day it will close. And it's fair to say that for in many cases, the closure is not thought through as effectively and as early as it should be. And actually what we're doing is working with a lot of clients thinking about either these are mines which are about to go into operation or during operation, or they've got to the end of their life, around how effectively to close those, how to kind of create a vision around them, and actually how it can be moved into really generating benefit for the community, for wider society, but also obviously in terms of managing risk for the mining company. One particular area which is really evolving is the just transition, and especially as we transition out of coal, is how to create new industry, new opportunities in these historic coal fields in Europe and elsewhere, as coal mining is slowly but surely reduced. Okay, so big area, and the idea of land stewardship is absolutely core to this rethinking of how to close out mines and use as assets. A second example is this is from the energy sector, a company who holds land holdings all over the world, literally probably got hundreds of thousands of land parcels, so a very significant landholder. And they've been looking at ways to kind of quantify the carbon stock associated with that global land portfolio, as a way of understanding it, but also how they can enhance that and help contribute to their company's decarbonisation goals and the wider society's decarbonisation. And then a third example, and recommend you take a look, is an interesting booklet that Nicole has produced in collaboration with the Common Forum, which are the group of environmental regulators across Europe, focused on contaminated land, and really bringing some ideas around land stewardship and how land can be returned to productive use. And some of you may have seen this picture that is called the Lady of the North. It's an old coal spoil heap, which has been converted into a wonderful community project. Now I believe hundreds of thousands of people visit it every year, and it creates a real community benefit. And I think it's just a lovely example of how historic industrial land can be reused and generate value. So moving on to communicating business cases, and there's kind of three main themes I want to share with you. The first is around quantifying and monetizing. I've kind of touched on that briefly before. The second is focusing on materiality. And the third is really using the language and the frameworks that investors will understand. So in terms of quantify and monetize, I showed you some indicators earlier. Look, those are relevant to industry as they're thinking about their land portfolio. But I'm sure the Living Labs can come up with a similar list of indicators, and I'm sure there's some good work being done on that. But it's really super important to have those clear indicators. It's also equally important to be able to quantify and monetize those indicators. Sorry to say it, but the monetization does speak, and investors think about things in monetary value. We're not going to change that. And the third is to really use the right combination and the spectrum of skill sets. So sometimes projects can obviously get too narrow and really come at it from a single skill set. What's really important is to be thinking quite holistically around biodiversity, social, economic, etc., etc. So bring those skill sets together. On the materiality is really important not to get lost in the weeds and avoid that sort of, the risk of going deep and narrow. Investors get lost if you have that kind of conversation with them. They're not generally technical people, and it's really important to be able to speak their language, which I'll come on to a bit more. It's important to think about it at the portfolio level, but also don't lose sight of those local details. Another key thing is around identifying, delivering, and communicating those quick wins and those sort of longer term opportunities and plays. And then last but not least is use the investor language. So, where it's appropriate, align with the strategy, whether that's a local regeneration strategy or for a company, their sustainability strategy, but align with that, speak in that language. Make sure you're aligning with the kind of disclosure or reporting frameworks. There's a list of them there. Again, that's the language that decision makers and investors are thinking about. Last but not least, also leverage kind of external frameworks. So, for example, the SDGs as a way of communicating. Okay, and then to Alberto's challenge to me is how can soil health improvers connect to investors? And I've been thinking about that after Alberto's question, and I feel a route to that, and I want to focus on that. And I'm not sure if this has already come up on the webinar, Alberto, but is around the voluntary carbon markets. And I think hopefully many of you are aware that actually the kind of route to carbon credits from soil health improvers is developing. It's certainly not a mature system yet, but it's gaining real traction over the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years. I was really struck by the Earthshot Prize, which was won by an Indian NGO called Bhumitra, which was doing exactly this. So sort of giving local farmers access to carbon credits via the voluntary carbon markets. And through that, getting investment back into the local farmers so that they could improve their soil health. So it really becomes this kind of win-win cycle. And so I think this is something potentially very interesting. And there's a supply side, the intermediaries, and the demand side. The investors are clearly sitting on the demand side, and these will be banks, pension funds, private equity, for example, who are looking for opportunities to invest in sustainable and ESG rich opportunities, and also companies who are looking to compensate their own carbon emissions and use. Yeah, and then on the far side, you've got the project developers. And there is now a route for those project developers, which could be at a kind of farming scale, it could be obviously at a cooperative, it could be at the kind of living lab scale, or broader, to get connected to those investors through the carbon markets. And you know, look, I'm not a specialist in this area, and you know, but my colleagues who work in this space are seeing more and more this connection from the you know, that agricultural world, if you like, into the brokers and through that into the investors. And I've just added on the right, and I won't go into the detail on this, but how that kind of life cycle of how that climate project can be connected through the carbon markets. But Alberto, to your sort of challenge, I wonder if this is a route which could be of interest and something to really think about and work out the kind of route to do that. So with that, I'd like to close and thank you for listening, and you know, feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, Oliver, very much. I think this your session was quite unique. It was important to make the connection between soil health living labs with the industry and investors, as it happens that frequently they are not related at all. Yeah, and yeah. So okay. If you have participants any question, so as always, please voice them or include them in the chats. Okay. We have no questions, so Oliver, thank you very much for bringing this up.
Good.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care. Bye. Okay, so we have come to the end of the webinar. We have gone from current research about economic instruments to improve soil health. We got familiarized with a protocol to design sustainable business models the first day, to services in place with the Horizon Results Booster, a free of charge service to maximize impacts beyond dissemination and exploitation, and the AxeLab service we learned about today. Also, hands-on experiences have been presented with the journey of OMKI in Hungary towards their sustainability, financial sustainability. OMKI is a living lab that addresses organic agroecology, and we learned also on MaxOil in Greece with their multi-stakeholder governance structure. Last, IMEC presented ideas for the sustainability of living labs based on real experiences, and Oliver talked about business cases for industry to contribute to improved soil health. So we hope it served to you to bring ideas for the long-term sustainability of your soil health living labs, lighthouses, or the initiatives you want to foster in the short term. We will edit the recording and upload it to the website, so stay tuned to the PREPSOIL websites to have this material. Thank you very much, and have a good day.